Some people just don't belong in first class, she thought, a smirk ghosting her lips as she watched him settle into seat 2B. It was a thought as crisp and sterile as the cabin air, a quick, satisfying judgment that made her feel a little better about the ache in her feet and the lingering bitterness from her pre-shift argument with her ex-husband. She didn't know it yet, but that single lazy, prejudiced thought was about to cost her more than her career. It was about to become the most expensive thought of her entire life, setting in motion a chain of events that would ground a 200-ton aircraft and dismantle her world in a matter of minutes. Catherine Peterson, Kate to her friends, and lead to the junior flight attendants who both feared and admired her, believed in order. She believed in the crisp fold of a napkin, the precise angle of a reclined seat, and the unspoken hierarchy that made the world, or at least the 35,000-foot-high sliver of it she controlled, make sense. For 22 years with Omni Air International, this belief had been her armor. It had protected her from crying babies in economy, lecherous businessmen in premium, and the gnawing feeling that her life hadn't quite taken off the way she'd planned. Tonight's flight, OA-112 from JFK to London Heathrow, was the jewel in Omni's crown. The first-class cabin of the brand-new Boeing 777X was less an airplane section and more a collection of private suites in the sky. It was a place for titans of industry, hereditary aristocrats, and the pop culture royalty of the moment. It was Kate's stage. Her pre-flight checks were a ritual. She ran a gloved finger along the polished burr wood of the suite enclosures, ensuring not a speck of dust marred the surface. She inspected the regal crystal glasses, holding them up to the soft, ambient light. Everything was perfect. The passengers began to board, a predictable parade of quiet wealth. A silver-haired man who ran a hedge fund, his face familiar from the pages of Forbes. A woman in a Chanel travel suit who was a senior partner at a white shoe law firm in the city of London. A young, chic couple who were probably tech money. Then he boarded. He was tall and lean, wearing a plain gray hoodie, the hood pulled down, with a pair of well-worn jeans and expensive-looking but understated sneakers. On his back was a simple black backpack. He held a boarding pass that read Thorn M, Seat 2B. He looked, to Kate's discerning eye, like he had gotten lost on his way to the back of the plane. He had kind eyes, but they were tired. He offered a polite, small smile to the flight attendant at the door and made his way down the aisle. Kate's internal systems, honed by 2 decades of snap judgments, flagged him immediately. Lottery winner? Maybe a rapper or an athlete. He didn't carry the quiet, confident aura of old money or the loud, performative swagger of new money. He just looked out of place. He was also black, and in the sterile, predominantly white sanctuary of international first class, Kate's mind, poisoned by 1,000 tiny prejudices she would never admit to having, saw this as another piece of data that didn't fit. He found his seat next to a teenage girl already settled by the window in 2A, who looked up from her phone and smiled. His sister, presumably. The girl was dressed similarly, in comfortable travel clothes that screamed anonymous rather than affluent. "Excuse me," Kate said, her voice a little too loud, a little too sharp. She had perfected a tone that was technically polite, but carried an unmistakable undercurrent of authority. The young man who was in the middle of sliding his backpack under the ottoman looked up. "Yes? That bag cannot be stored there for takeoff," she said, gesturing vaguely. "It will need to go in an overhead bin. It's my carry-on. It fits the dimensions, and it'll slide all the way under," he replied, his voice calm and low. "I'd prefer to keep it with me. Sir, for safety regulations, all bags of that size must be stowed overhead during takeoff and landing. I can find a space for you." Her smile was plastic, unmoving. It didn't reach the cool blue of her eyes. "It's a soft bag and it's mostly empty. See?" He compressed it easily with his hand. "It's no different from a large handbag. The gentleman in 1C has a leather briefcase under his ottoman that's twice the size." He said it not as an accusation, but as a simple observation. Kate's smile tightened. He had not only questioned her authority, but had done so calmly and logically, which she found infinitely more irritating than outright aggression. She glanced at the man in 1C, the hedge fund manager, a platinum medallion member for a decade, and then back at the young man in the hoodie. "I'll handle that passenger separately, sir. Right now, I need you to stow your bag," she insisted. The young man, Marcus, held her gaze for a moment. He could see it all there. The years of practiced condescension, the micro-judgments flickering behind her eyes. He had seen that look 1,000 times. In shops where he was followed, in restaurants where the service was inexplicably slow. He was the son of Marcus Thorne Sr., a man whose name was synonymous with innovation and whose net worth was a number with so many commas it looked like a typo. He could have bought and sold this entire airline with the money he kept in his rainy day accounts. But his father had taught him and his sister Maya something more valuable than wealth, the quiet dignity of not needing to prove it. He sighed, not in anger, but in weariness. "Fine," he said, standing up. He slid the backpack out, opened a nearby overhead bin, and placed it inside. As he did, a well-worn paperback book fell out, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He picked it up and sat back down without another word. Kate felt a surge of victory, the small, petty thrill of putting someone back in their place. It was a feeling that momentarily soothed the frayed edges of her mood. She turned to take pre-flight drink orders. She started at the front of the cabin, her voice sweet as honey for the regulars. "Mr. Caldwell, the usual Macallan 18 before we depart?" "You know me too well, Catherine." "Mrs. Davies, a glass of the Bollinger?" "Lovely, thank you." When she reached row 2, she addressed the girl by the window first. "Miss, can I get you something to drink before takeoff? Orange juice, perhaps?" "Just some water, please, thank you," Maya said, her eyes still on her phone. Kate then turned to Marcus, her professional smile back in place, but the warmth dialed down several notches. "And for you, sir?" "I'll have a glass of the Hibiki 21, please," he said, looking at the menu. Kate paused. The Hibiki 21 was a $700 bottle of Japanese whiskey. The airline kept only 1 or 2 on board for its most discerning, high-rolling customers. It was not something you ordered lightly. It was, in her mind, a test, a way for this upstart to try and prove he belonged. Her eyes flickered with suspicion. "That is a very premium selection, sir," she said, the insinuation hanging heavy in the air. "Can you even afford it? Do you even know what it is?" Marcus closed the menu and placed it on the table beside him. His quietness was starting to feel less like politeness and more like a coiled spring. "I'm aware," he said, his voice perfectly even. "That's why I ordered it. Is there a problem?" The entire exchange had lasted less than 90 seconds, but the atmosphere around seat 2B had grown thick and heavy. The lawyer in the Chanel suit lowered her newspaper slightly. Her interest peaked. The couple in front pretended not to listen, but their conversation had stopped. Kate felt her authority being challenged again. Her cheeks flushed. She had 2 choices: back down and get the drink, or double down and assert her dominance. Her pride, already wounded by his defiance over the backpack, made the choice for her. "Of course not," she said with a brittle smile. "I just need to see your boarding pass again, to confirm your seat." It was a ridiculous request, a bureaucratic power play designed to humiliate. She knew his seat. She just wanted him to know that she was in charge. Maya, his sister, finally looked up from her phone, a frown creasing her brow. She sensed the shift in the air. Marcus didn't move. He didn't reach for his pocket. He just looked at her. "My boarding pass is for seat 2B. My name is Marcus Thorne. You already scanned it when I boarded. You looked me up on your manifest when I asked about my bag. You know exactly who I am and where I'm sitting. So I'll ask again. Is there a problem with me ordering a glass of whiskey?" His voice was still quiet, but it now carried a blade's edge. He had dismantled her pretense, piece by piece, laying bare the ugly mechanism of her prejudice for everyone to see. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't sworn. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply used the truth as a weapon. And for Kate Peterson, that was the final straw. Humiliation burned hot in her chest. Her carefully constructed world of order and control was being dismantled by a kid in a hoodie. In her mind, he wasn't just a passenger. He was a symbol of everything that felt wrong in her life. The lack of respect, the feeling of being powerless. Her ex-husband's mocking tone, her mounting bills, her stalled career. It all coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage, directed at the calm, unflinching face in front of her. "Don't you take that tone with me," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. All pretense of customer service vanished, replaced by raw, unfiltered fury. "I'm just asking for the drink I'm entitled to in the class I paid for," Marcus said, his composure starting to crack into visible disbelief at the sheer unprofessionalism of it all. "Your tone is the one that's been the problem since I stepped on this plane." And then it happened. In a swift, shocking motion that seemed to defy the logic of a first-class cabin, Kate's training, her professionalism, her very sanity, snapped. She drew back her hand and slapped Marcus Thorne Jr. across the face. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed cabin, a sharp, ugly crack that silenced everything. The clinking of ice in glasses, the soft murmur of conversation, the hum of the ventilation, all gone. Marcus's head jerked to the side from the impact. A red mark began to bloom on his cheek. He didn't cry out. He didn't retaliate. He just stared, his eyes wide with a profound, soul-deep shock. His sister Maya gasped, her phone clattering to the floor. The hedge fund manager's jaw dropped. The lawyer in the Chanel suit stared, horrified. Someone in the back of the first-class cabin whispered, "Oh my God!" For a single frozen second, Kate's mind went blank. The only thing she could feel was the stinging in her own palm. Then a wave of adrenaline-fueled triumph washed over her. She had done it. She had put him in his place. She had won. She stood there, breathing heavily, chest puffed out, a warrior who had just vanquished a threat. She looked down at him, expecting to see fear, or shame, or anger. She saw none of it. She only saw a deep, bottomless well of disappointment. And behind him, through the window of seat 2A, she could see the flashing lights of the ground crew. The jet bridge, which had begun its slow retreat from the aircraft door, shuddered to a halt. Then, with a low hydraulic groan, it began to move back towards the plane. Seconds after the slap, a new voice filled the cabin. It wasn't the pre-recorded safety announcement. It was the captain, his voice devoid of its usual folksy charm. It was cold, hard, and utterly final. "Flight attendants, take your seats immediately. All passengers, do not leave your seats. We are returning to the gate." The flight and Kate Peterson's entire life had just been frozen on the tarmac. The silence that followed the captain's announcement was heavier than the plane itself. It was a dense, suffocating blanket of disbelief and dread. The gentle hum of the auxiliary power unit seemed to mock the tension in the cabin. Every eye in first class was fixed on the unfolding drama in row 2, a real-life theater of the absurd. Kate Peterson felt a cold knot form in the pit of her stomach, displacing the hot rage from moments before. Returning to the gate? That never happened unless there was a serious mechanical issue, a security threat, or a medical emergency. She had just created a scene. Yes, a deeply unprofessional one. But it wasn't a reason to halt a transatlantic flight. Her mind raced, trying to find a plausible explanation. Maybe there was a warning light in the cockpit. Maybe the captain's announcement was a coincidence. It had to be. But as the seconds stretched into a full minute and the soft chime indicated the cabin doors were being disarmed, she knew it was no coincidence. The world she had commanded so absolutely just moments ago was slipping from her grasp. Marcus Thorne Jr. hadn't moved. He slowly raised a hand to his cheek, his fingers gently probing the tender, red skin. The shock in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a steely calm that was far more unnerving than any outburst would have been. His sister Maya had picked up her phone. Her thumbs were flying across the screen, her face a mask of furious purpose. "Are you okay?" she whispered to her brother, her voice trembling slightly. He finally turned to look at her, a flicker of reassurance in his eyes. "I'm fine, Maya. Don't worry." But his words were for her alone. His gaze, when it shifted back to Kate, was glacial. Kate tried to regain control. "As per the captain's instructions, I need to," she started to say, her voice wavering, but the words died in her throat. What was she supposed to do? Continue service? Pretend she hadn't just physically assaulted a passenger? Before she could formulate another thought, the main cabin door hissed open. Two figures stepped onto the plane. They were not the usual late boarding passengers. The first was a man in a sharp, dark suit, his face grim. He was Mark Iverson, Omni Air's chief of airport operations at JFK, a man Kate had only ever seen in corporate training videos. The second man was in the uniform of the Port Authority Police Department. A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin. This had escalated beyond an internal airline matter. Kate's heart hammered against her ribs. She expected them to approach Marcus, to get his side of the story, to perhaps escort him off for being disruptive. A narrative she was already frantically trying to construct in her head. He was aggressive. He was threatening. I felt unsafe. The words lined up, ready to be deployed. But Iverson and the officer walked right past seat 2B. They walked directly to her. "Ms. Peterson," Iverson said, his voice low and devoid of any warmth. He didn't even use her first name. "Please come with us." What is this about?" Kate stammered, the blood draining from her face. "There was a disruptive passenger. I was handling the situation." Iverson's eyes were like chips of granite. "The situation, as you call it, has been handled, from above. Now please collect your personal belongings. You will be escorted off the aircraft." "Escorted off? I am the lead flight attendant on this flight," she protested, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just—" "I can and I am." Iverson cut her off sharply. "Your employment with Omni Air is terminated, effective immediately. Your credentials are to be surrendered to me now." The words hit Kate with the force of a physical blow. Terminated. 22 years of service, of seniority, of building a life around the sky. Gone. In an instant. It wasn't possible. The union, the protocols, the layers of HR, they couldn't just fire her on the spot, on the plane, in front of everyone. "On what grounds?" she demanded, a desperate, defiant energy surging through her. That passenger was unruly. On the grounds of gross misconduct, unprofessionalism, and the physical assault of a passenger, an event witnessed by this entire cabin and, I am told, recorded on video. He glanced pointedly at Maya, who had her phone held up, the small red light of the recording function glowing brightly. The video. Of course. Kate's world began to spin. The carefully constructed lies she was building in her mind crumbled to dust. There was proof. The PAPD officer stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, Kate numbly unclipped her airline ID from her uniform. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely manage the simple mechanism. She handed the plastic card to Iverson. It felt like she was handing over her entire identity. As she was turned and gently guided toward the door, her eyes swept across the cabin. She saw no sympathy. She saw shock, disgust, and a cold, detached sense of justice being served. The hedge fund manager wouldn't meet her eye. The lawyer in the Chanel suit watched her with a look of clinical distaste, as if observing a distasteful legal precedent being set. Her gaze finally landed on Marcus Thorne Jr. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. There was no triumph in his eyes, no satisfaction. There was just a quiet, profound sadness. That, more than anything, broke her. The pity of the man she had just assaulted. As she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, a flurry of activity was underway. A new flight attendant crew, looking bewildered and rushed, was heading on board. David Chen, the CEO of Omni Air International, a man Kate had seen only once at a company-wide town hall, was striding down the jet bridge toward the plane, his face pale and set. He completely ignored Kate as he passed, his focus solely on getting onto that aircraft and containing a disaster. The disaster wasn't a faulty engine or a bomb threat. The disaster was her. What Kate couldn't have known, what was impossible for her to comprehend in her narrow world of cabin hierarchies, was the power of the unseen hand she had slapped. When Maya Thorne's thumbs had flown across her screen, she had sent a single text message. It wasn't to a friend or to post on social media. It was to a number on her favorites list labeled simply Dad. The text read, "A flight attendant just hit Marcus." 3,000 miles away, in his penthouse overlooking Lake Washington in Seattle, Marcus Thorne Sr. was concluding a late-night video conference with his board in Tokyo. He was a titan, a man who had built Thorne Industries from a garage startup into a global behemoth that had its tentacles in everything from cloud computing and AI development to green energy and private space exploration. He was wealthier than most countries and more influential than most politicians. But he had two weaknesses: his son, Marcus Jr., and his daughter, Maya. His phone buzzed on the polished mahogany desk. He glanced at it, saw Maya's name, and immediately excused himself from the call. He read the text, and for a moment, the famously placid billionaire felt a surge of cold fury he hadn't experienced in years. His son, his quiet, thoughtful, gentle boy, struck. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. Marcus Thorne Sr. operated with a far more terrifying efficiency. His next call was not to the police or to a lawyer. It was to his personal assistant, a woman of legendary competence. "Get me David Chen at Omni-Air. Now," he commanded. Not his assistant, not his office. His personal cell. "You have 1 minute." Less than 45 seconds later, David Chen, who had been enjoying a quiet dinner with his wife at a Manhattan restaurant, saw his private phone light up with a name that made his blood run cold. Marcus Thorne Soar. Thorne was not just a valued customer. Thorne Industries, through one of its many subsidiary investment portfolios, was the largest single institutional shareholder in Omni-Air's parent company, holding a controlling 18% stake. Marcus Thorne Sr. was, for all intents and purposes, his boss's boss's boss. "Marcus," Chen answered, his voice instantly tense. "Is everything all right?" "No, David, it is not." Thorne's voice was calm, but it was the calmness of a nuclear reactor reaching critical mass. "My son and daughter are on your flight OA-112 at JFK in first class. I've just been informed by my daughter that one of your flight attendants, a lead attendant, has just physically assaulted my son. So I want you to explain to me, in the next 30 seconds, why that flight should be allowed to take off." Chen felt a wave of nausea. This was the call every CEO dreads. Not an earnings miss, not a bad press cycle, but a personal failing of the company directly affecting one of the most powerful people on the planet. "Marcus, I am speechless. I had no idea. Save the apologies, David," Thorne cut in. "Here is what is going to happen. That plane is not moving an inch. You are going to get down to that airport yourself tonight. You are going to remove that employee from my children's presence. You are going to install a new crew. You are going to personally apologize to my son and my daughter. And tomorrow morning, you and I are going to have a discussion about the corporate culture at Omni-Air that allows your employees to feel comfortable putting their hands on a passenger. Am I clear?" "Crystal, Marcus." "Crystal clear," Chen stammered, already grabbing for his coat. "I'm on my way." He hung up and immediately called Mark Iverson at JFK. "Mark, drop everything," Chen said, his voice strained. "Go to the gate for OA-112. Ground the flight. A lead flight attendant named—" He paused, realizing he didn't even have her name. It didn't matter. "A lead attendant has assaulted Marcus Thorne's son. Yes, that Marcus Thorne. Fire her. Get her off the plane. I want her gone before I get there in 20 minutes. Handle it." That was the unseen hand. A text message, 2 phone calls, and the full, terrifying weight of modern capital and power had been brought to bear on Gate C62. It had descended upon Kate Peterson, a woman who had no idea that the quiet boy in the hoodie held more power in his little finger than she had ever accumulated in her entire life. She was no longer just an unemployed flight attendant. She was about to become infamous. As Kate was led through the sterile corridors of the JFK terminal by a silent Mark Iverson and the Port Authority officer, she felt strangely disconnected from her body. The harsh, fluorescent lights seemed too bright, the distant, garbled flight announcements like a language she no longer understood. Her world had been contained within the fuselage of an airplane for so long that this sudden, brutal expulsion felt like being ejected into a vacuum. In a small, windowless office deep in the terminal's administrative wing, the formalities were concluded with brutal efficiency. Iverson read from a script, detailing the cause for her immediate termination. She was asked to sign a document acknowledging receipt of the notice. She refused, a final, futile act of defiance. The officer handed her a summons. The Thorne family wasn't pressing criminal charges, not yet, but the Port Authority was, for interfering with the duties of a flight crew and causing a disturbance. It was ironic. She was the flight crew. "My purse. My things are on the plane," she mumbled, her mind foggy. "They will be collected and sent to your home address," Iverson said coldly, placing her signed termination papers into a folder. "A taxi voucher is being arranged for you. I suggest you use it." He then turned and left the room without another word, leaving her alone with the officer, who now looked at her with a vague sense of pity. The taxi ride back to her modest home in Howard Beach, Queens, was a blur. The city lights smeared past the window, a vibrant world she was no longer a part of. When she finally stumbled through her front door, the house was dark and quiet. Her teenage son was at his father's for the week. The silence was a physical weight. She sank onto her sofa, the summons crumpled in her hand. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a hollow, trembling exhaustion. She tried to process it. Fired. A potential criminal charge. All for what? A moment of anger? A slap? It seemed disproportionate, insane. She was the victim, wasn't she? She was the one who was provoked by the disrespectful youth. It was then that she made her second catastrophic mistake of the night. She picked up her phone. She had a text from a junior flight attendant, a friend named Chloe. "Kate, what the hell happened? My phone is blowing up. Are you okay?" Kate's fingers trembled as she opened her social media apps, and her world, which had already shrunk from the sky to a small house in Queens, collapsed into the terrifying, pixelated confines of a screen. It was everywhere. The hashtag Najjar Omni Air Assault was trending worldwide. The first video had been posted less than an hour ago by a passenger in seat 3C. It was grainy and shot from a distance, but it was unmistakable. It showed her, leaning in, her face contorted with anger. It showed her hands swinging through the air, and it captured with horrifying clarity the sickening sound of the slap. Then there was the second video. This one was far worse. It was crystal clear, shot in 4K from the adjacent seat, Maya Thorne's video. It started earlier, capturing Kate's condescending tone about the Hibiki whiskey. It captured Marcus's calm, logical responses. It captured her escalating hostility, her demand for the boarding pass, her venomous, "Don't you take that tone with me." And then the slap in brutal high definition. It showed Marcus's shock, the red mark blooming on his face, Maya's gasp. It was a masterclass in self-incrimination. The caption Maya had posted with it was simple and devastating. "This is Catherine Peterson, a lead flight attendant for Omni Air. She didn't think my brother belonged in first class, so she assaulted him. This is not okay." Beneath the videos, the digital guillotine was falling. Thousands of comments, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. "Fire her immediately. Omni Air. This is disgusting. The racism is palpable. 22 years of service, and this is how she acts? Imagine what she's gotten away with before. That poor young man. He was so calm. She was completely unhinged. Her own Facebook profile, which she had left public, had been found. Photos of her, smiling in her uniform in Paris, on a beach in Thailand, were now plastered with hateful comments. People had found her address. They had found her son's school. They were calling her a racist, a Karen, a monster. She was no longer Kate Peterson, a flawed human being who had made a terrible mistake. She was a meme, a villain in the internet's daily 2 minutes of hate. Meanwhile, back at JFK, the wheels of corporate damage control were spinning at light speed. David Chen, Omni Air's CEO, had personally overseen the boarding of the new crew. He had walked to seat 2B, his face a mask of profound apology. "Mr. Thorne," he began, his voice laced with humility, There are no words to express how deeply sorry I am. On behalf of the entire airline, I apologize for what you and your sister experienced tonight. It was unprofessional, unacceptable, and it is not what Omni Air stands for." Marcus looked up at the CEO, a man who a few hours ago would have been an untouchable figure in a boardroom. Now he was here, bowing essentially, at his seat. "Thank you for coming down, Mr. Chen," Marcus said, his voice hoarse. "I appreciate it. I hope you understand this isn't about me." "I understand completely," Chen said quickly. "This is about our culture, our training, our promise of safety and respect. A promise we broke tonight. I give you my personal assurance. We will conduct a full top-to-bottom review. This will never happen again. Maya, ever watchful, spoke up. What's going to happen to her? Chen hesitated. Her employment has been terminated, and we will cooperate fully with any investigation the Port Authority undertakes. Marcus nodded slowly. He felt no joy in hearing it. He just felt an immense, draining sadness. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted a woman's life to be ruined. He had just wanted to be treated like a human being. The flight OA-112 finally took off 2 hours and 47 minutes late, with a fresh crew, a profusely apologetic CEO, and a first-class cabin still reeling from the drama. But the story was no longer on the plane. It was loose, a digital wildfire consuming everything in its path. Over the next 48 hours, it only got worse for Kate. Her name and face were on every major news network. CNN, Fox News, BBC, they all ran the story, dissecting the video, interviewing aviation experts and commentators on race and privilege. Thorne Industries, when contacted, released a brief, powerful statement. The Thorne family is grateful for the swift and decisive action of Omni-Air's leadership. This unfortunate incident highlights the ongoing need for conversations about implicit bias and respect in all industries. The family will be making no further comment and asks that their privacy be respected. The statement was a stroke of genius. It took the high road, framed the issue not as a personal vendetta, but as a societal problem, and simultaneously cemented Kate's role as the villain. Kate, barricaded in her home, watched it all unfold in a state of horror. Her ex-husband called, screaming at her. "Do you know what you've done? Our son is being mocked at school. They're calling him the son of Airplane Karen." Her union, which she thought would be her staunchest defender, issued a lukewarm statement condemning violence of any kind and stating they were monitoring the situation. They knew a losing battle when they saw one. Defending Kate was career suicide for any union representative. The video was too clear, the victim too powerful, the public outrage too immense. Desperate, she agreed to an interview with a prominent cable news host known for her confrontational style. It was Kate's third and final catastrophic mistake. She thought she could tell her side of the story, that she could make people see her as the victim. On national television, looking haggard and stressed, she tried to spin her narrative. "He was very aggressive," she said, her voice trembling. "His tone, his attitude, I felt threatened. I have a right to defend myself in my workplace." The host played the video again, pausing it right before the slap. "Threatened, Ms. Peterson? He is sitting down. You are standing over him. He has asked for a drink and questioned your request to see his boarding pass a second time. Where exactly is the threat?" "It was his demeanor. The way he looked at me," Kate floundered. "The way a black man looked at you?" The host pressed, her voice sharp. "Is that what you mean? Because to many of our viewers, it looks like you were the aggressor from the very beginning, singling him out because you didn't think he belonged." Kate fell apart on live television. She stammered, she contradicted herself, she cried. She came across not as a sympathetic victim, but as a cornered bigot, unable to justify her own actions. The interview was a disaster. Instead of dousing the flames, she had thrown a barrel of jet fuel on them. The hard karma had only just begun. The internet had taken her job and her reputation. Now the real world was coming for the rest. Omni-Air's legal department informed her they would be suing her to recoup the costs of the flight delay, fuel, airport fees, passenger compensation, which amounted to over $150,000. The Port Authority was moving forward with the criminal complaint, and the man she had slapped, the quiet boy in the hoodie, was about to inadvertently deliver the final, crushing blow to the life she once knew. Not through malice, but through the simple, unstoppable momentum of his own existence. A week after the incident, the digital storm had moved on, chasing new villains and fresh outrages. The hashtags receded like a tide, leaving behind a stained and silent shoreline where Kate Peterson's life used to be. For the world, it was old news. For Kate, the true consequences were just beginning to arrive, not with the loud bang of a media explosion, but with the quiet, methodical turning of institutional gears. The karma that was coming for her wasn't a single dramatic lightning strike. It was a slow, grinding, and meticulous deconstruction of her existence, brick by painful brick. The first pillar to be systematically demolished was her financial security. The certified letter from Omni Air's legal department wasn't threatening. It was coldly factual. It detailed, with itemized precision, the costs incurred by the 2-hour and 47-minute delay of Flight OA-112. Jet fuel burned while idling. Gate occupancy fees charged by the Port Authority. The mandated compensation paid to all 34 passengers in first and business class for the disruption. The cost of calling in and compensating an entirely new flight crew at a moment's notice. The total came to $157,842.99. The letter politely informed her that, pursuant to the gross misconduct clause in her employment contract, the airline would be seeking full restitution. Her union-appointed lawyer, a man named Frank Gillespie, whose office smelled of stale coffee and regret, didn't sugarcoat it. He sat across from her at his cluttered desk, his tired eyes scanning the documents she'd brought. He'd seen cases like this before, though usually involving theft or intoxication, not a viral video of assault. "It's an ironclad clause, Catherine," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "You acted outside the scope of your professional duties. You physically struck a passenger. The airline is legally within its rights to firewall themselves from your actions and pass the damages on to you." "But I was provoked," Kate insisted, her voice tight with a desperation that was becoming her new normal. "He was insolent. He was challenging my authority in front of everyone. I felt threatened. I had to maintain order." Frank sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 lost causes. "Let me be blunt. The video is a killer. There is no judge or jury in this country who will watch that footage and see a threatened employee. They will see a young man sitting calmly in his seat and a flight attendant initiating a physical confrontation. Your feeling of being threatened doesn't stand up against the visual evidence. You lost your temper. It's that simple and it's that fatal." "So what do I do?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "We negotiate," he said, though he sounded anything but hopeful. "They don't want to drag this through court any more than you do. It's bad press. We'll try to get the number down. But they're going to want something substantial. They'll put a lien on your house. They'll garnish any future wages. Catherine," he leaned forward, his voice softening for the first time, "you need to understand. This number isn't going away. It will follow you." Her house, the modest bungalow in Howard Beach she had clawed for in the divorce, the one place that was unequivocally hers. The idea of a corporate lien clinging to its title, a permanent stain reflecting this one catastrophic mistake, made her feel a wave of nausea. Her already meager savings, meant for a retirement she now saw, was a fantasy, evaporated into legal retainers for both the Omni lawsuit and the Port Authority's criminal complaint. Within a month, she was at the bank, shamefaced, signing the papers for a second mortgage, plunging herself into a chasm of debt so deep she couldn't see the bottom. The second pillar to fall was social, and its collapse was quieter but infinitely more painful. Her friends, the tight-knit community of flight attendants she had shared 2 decades of holidays, layovers, and life events with, vanished. She made the mistake of calling Chloe, the junior attendant who had sent the initial concerned text. "Chloe, it's Kate," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, hey, Kate," Chloe said, her voice suddenly guarded and distant. I'm going through a lot. I was hoping to talk." "Yeah, look, Kate, it's a really bad time," Chloe said quickly, the sound of a television audible in the background. "I'm in the middle of something. The whole thing is it's crazy. Management is sending out memos every day about conduct in social media. It's really tense here." The unspoken message was deafeningly clear. "You are toxic. Associating with you is a risk I'm not willing to take." "I understand," Kate lied. "I'll let you go." She hung up before Chloe could offer another flimsy excuse. She never heard from her again. Her neighbors, once friendly faces for a quick chat while getting the mail, now treated her like a ghost. She saw Mrs. Gable from next door spot her through the kitchen window and then quickly pull the shade down. Her ex-husband's calls were no longer just arguments. They were torrents of vitriol. "They're calling him Karen's kid at school, Kate. he yelled through the phone. "My son is being bullied because of you. He doesn't want to come over on your weekends anymore. He's embarrassed. Are you happy now? Was it worth it?" She was a plague, and everyone she loved was either distancing themselves from the infection or blaming her for the symptoms. She was truly, profoundly alone. The third and most crucial pillar to crumble was her future. An experienced lead flight attendant is a valuable commodity in the airline industry. A flight attendant fired for assaulting a passenger on video is an uninsurable pariah. Her applications to the legacy carriers were met with automated rejections. Her attempts with budget airlines went unanswered. She was blacklisted, a walking liability. After months of failure, a single glint of hope appeared. An interview with Stratus Jet Charters, a boutique private aviation firm based out of Teterboro Airport. It wasn't commercial, it was corporate. A different world. Perhaps, she prayed, a world where her specific brand of infamy hadn't fully penetrated. She spent what little money she had on a new suit. She rehearsed her answers, crafting a careful narrative of a mutual separation from Omni. The office was sleek, modern, and intimidatingly quiet. The interviewer, a woman named Susan with impeccably styled hair and a sharp, intelligent gaze, greeted her with a polite, professional smile. For the first 10 minutes, Kate allowed herself to hope. The conversation was going well. Susan seemed impressed by her extensive experience with international routes and high-end service protocols. "Your resume is, of course, very impressive, Catherine," Susan said, looking down at the paper. 22 years is a long, distinguished career, but it does appear your tenure with Omni Air ended rather abruptly. Can you tell me about that?" Here it was, the moment of truth. "There was a professional disagreement with management over a passenger handling incident," Kate said, her voice smooth and practiced. "We ultimately decided it was best to part ways." Susan listened patiently, her fingers steepled. She didn't respond for a long moment. Then she said, "The incident on flight OA-112. We're aware of it." Kate's blood ran cold. "At Stratus," Susan continued, her voice losing its warmth and taking on the hard edge of corporate steel, "we provide bespoke travel solutions for a very select, ultra-high net worth clientele. Our principles are discretion, privacy, and absolute, unimpeachable safety. A client needs to know that the person serving them a drink in the cabin is the epitome of professionalism and restraint." Susan paused and swiveled her large monitor around to face Kate. It displayed a press release from a few months prior, the headline glowing in the quiet office. "Thorn Industries announces exclusive, long-term partnership with Stratus Jet Charters for its global executive fleet." Kate stared at the name, Thorn, and felt the air leave her lungs. It was as if the floor had dropped away, leaving her suspended in a nightmare. "Marcus Thorn Sr. and his entire executive team are our largest client," Susan explained, her voice clinical and detached. "We manage the travel logistics for Thorn Industries worldwide. His family, his son Marcus Jr., and his daughter Maya, fly with us exclusively when they travel privately. The young man you assaulted is one of our most frequent passengers." She swiveled the monitor back, the soft click of the mechanism sounding like a slamming door. "So you see, Ms. Peterson, your presence here is not just a non-starter. It's an impossibility. Thank you for your time. The security guard will show you out." Stumbling out onto the street, the sounds of the city muted by the roaring in her ears, Kate finally understood the true nature of the power she had confronted. It wasn't just money, it was a web, an ecosystem. The Thorns didn't just exist in the world, they were a part of its very infrastructure, and she had, with one idiotic, prejudiced slap, gotten herself exiled from it entirely. Her descent was swift and brutal. She sold her car. She began taking jobs that her former self would have looked down upon with pity and disdain. She worked the 3 a.m. to 11 a.m. shift stocking shelves at a vast, soulless, price-marked grocery store. The harsh, fluorescent lights a cruel mockery of the soft, ambient glow of her old first-class cabin. She became a house cleaner, joining a service that sent her to the sprawling apartments of Manhattan's elite. It was there, on her hands and knees scrubbing the marble floor of a cavernous Park Avenue penthouse, that karma delivered its most intimate and viciously ironic blow. The apartment was owned by a high-powered attorney who was never there. One afternoon, as Kate was wiping down the surfaces in the study, she noticed a framed photo on a bookshelf. It showed the owner, smiling warmly, arm in arm with her husband and children. The owner was the woman from Seat 1B on Flight OA-112, the one who had worn the Chanel travel suit and watched Kate's downfall with such clinical distaste. A hysterical laugh almost escaped Kate's lips. It was perfect. She was literally scrubbing the floor for a witness to her own humiliation. She was no longer a player in the game. She was an invisible servant, cleaning up the messes left by the people who inhabited a world from which she was now permanently barred. The rage she had harbored for so long was gone, scoured out of her and replaced by the hollow, aching emptiness of profound regret. While Kate's world was shrinking to the size of a mop bucket, Marcus Thorne Jr.'s was expanding exponentially. The incident had been a crucible for him. Shaken but galvanized, he and Maya had spent weeks reading the thousands of emails and messages that poured in. Stories from people of all backgrounds, detailing small slights and overt acts of discrimination they had endured while traveling, with no recourse and no one to listen. He realized his story was not unique, only its outcome was. His power wasn't in his name, but in the platform it provided. With a multi-million-dollar endowment from his father, he established the Meridian Project. The name was his idea. A meridian is a line that connects points across the globe, a standard by which we measure our position. The foundation's goal was to do the same for human dignity in the service industry. It provided legal firepower for those with legitimate grievances, and, more importantly, it partnered with corporations like OmniAir to build new training modules using VR and data analytics to expose and correct implicit bias. Marcus, the quiet student, had become a reluctant but powerful public voice for change, turning his personal pain into a public mission. About a year after the flight to nowhere, Kate was finishing a grueling 8-hour shift at the Price Mart. Her back throbbed, her feet were swollen, and the smell of stale bread and floor cleaner clung to her cheap uniform. She slumped onto a plastic chair in the grim little break room to eat her sandwich. A small television, bolted to the wall, was playing a cable news segment on the new faces of philanthropy. And then he was there, Marcus Thorne Jr. His face filled the screen. He wasn't in a hoodie anymore. He was in a well-tailored suit, standing at a lectern, addressing a packed auditorium. He looked older, more confident. His voice was the same, calm, measured, but now it carried the weight of purpose. Respect, he was saying, is not a luxury item. It's not an upgrade you can purchase with more money or a better class of ticket. It is the baseline. It is the fundamental currency of human interaction. My experience last year was unfortunate, but what it taught me is that for too many people, that baseline is not being met. The door was open for me to demand it. The mission of Meridian is to hold that door open for everyone else. Kate sat frozen, her sandwich forgotten in her hand. The plastic wrapper crinkled in her tightening fist. She watched the man whose life she had tried, in a moment of pathetic fury, to make smaller, and she saw that he had taken the ugliness she had handed him and used it as a cornerstone to build an empire of grace. In the flickering fluorescent light of that sad little break room, the final wall of her self-delusion crumbled into dust. There was no unfairness. There was no disproportionate response. There was only the brutal, perfect, and inescapable architecture of karma. An act of hate had been met with a consequence. An act of dignity had been built from the rubble. Her flight was over. His was just beginning. So what's the real takeaway from a story like this? It's not just about a single moment of anger or a slap heard round the world. It's about the silent, invisible currents of power, prejudice, and consequence that shape our lives. Kate Peterson wasn't a monster. She was a person who allowed her bitterness and biases to curdle into an act that had irreversible consequences. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a rich kid. He was a man who, when faced with ugliness, chose to build something beautiful. Their story is a stark reminder that in our interconnected world, every action, every word, and even every thought can create ripples we can't even begin to imagine. It proves that karma isn't always a mystical force. Sometimes it's just a text message to the right person. What do you think? Was the airline's response justified? Was Kate's fate a fair consequence for her actions? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, Don't forget to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more true life dramas.